All right, good evening everyone and welcome to Take Charge for October of 2014. Today we're going to be talking on an interesting topic. I've spoken to a couple of patients over the last couple of days, and some of them said, oh, I don't know if I want to come to the session today, Rob, talking about advanced care planning. Maybe a bit of a downer topic, but I mean, we all need to face reality in a sense. We're all going to die. It's a fact of life. We're not going to live forever. If we're lucky when our day finally comes, maybe we pass away quietly in our sleep, and I'm sure that would be how most of us would like that time to come. But unfortunately, that's not always how it happens. Sometimes the process is a little bit drawn out. And if that's the case with you, it's probably in your best interests to be managed and have all this end-of-life planning done the way you'd like it to be done. If you don't articulate your wishes to people before you get to that point, other people are going to be making those decisions for you. And hopefully they're the right decisions, but there sometimes might be a little bit of controversy for that. So I think many people think that it's probably a good idea to try and plan these things out in advance. And that's what our topic is going to be today. We're going to be talking about advanced care planning. Our speaker today is Ann Heesters. Ann is the Associate Director of Bioethics at University Health Network, specifically focusing on Toronto Rehab, which is our part of the hospital. She's also the Vice Chair of Research Ethics at Toronto Rehab. She's done this talk many number of times, and I know personally I've been looking forward to this for a while. So Ann, come on up. Thank you, ma'am.
Well, you don't know what I'm going to say yet, so you might want to hold your applause. But I didn't know that this was thought to be a depressing topic, which might tell you something about my life, my daily life. So I do ethics for a living. You'll get a sense of what that looks like, I hope, through a couple stories I want to tell you. Can you hear me okay? Does this work all right? I never trust this technology. I'm not a technological girl, but I'll try to keep the slides going in the right direction. Advanced care planning is a big initiative here at University Health Network, Toronto Rehab right now, and most of our work is being done with our staff. So we're talking to staff about how to talk to our patients and our families about advanced care planning, finding out who makes decisions for our patients if our patients aren't able to make them for themselves, collecting that information when you come and you register with us. But I think it's a little bit late when we start having that conversation in a hospital. I actually love that Rob invited me tonight, and I thank him very, very much for doing this, even though he has a camera rolling and I didn't hear that part when he invited me. I thank him and I thank Dr. O for inviting me tonight to talk to you, because I think people in our communities are the people who can best benefit from talking about this. So Kyle Anstey's my colleague. I have to give him a big shout out right now. Kyle's been leading the initiative in the hospital. But my private view, which is now public, is this is a conversation that should be had with you when you're home. So I should start with a little bit of a disclaimer. I'm a philosopher by training. I'm not a lawyer. So I'm not here to offer you legal advice at all. You can use a lawyer to draw up a thing called a living will. I'll talk about that in a moment. But you don't have to. This doesn't have to cost you anything at all. You can talk to your doctor about it too, although few people do, and it's a great thing to do. They're great resources, and there's some wonderful stuff online. So I'm glad Rob is having a session with folks tomorrow who aren't technologically adept, so that you can get some sense of where you can pull some things off the internet. But you can also do it old-fashioned ways, like picking up the phone and calling for the kind of booklet I'm going to talk about tonight. You can go online, you can pick up a phone, you can do it by snail mail as well. That still does exist, I think, even though there might not be home delivery. And I'm not endorsing any commercial products at all. So if I mention something out there, like talking to a lawyer, don't think you have to pay a cent for any of it. It's not like that. But I do encourage you to talk to the people close to you about what you value. That's my big sales line tonight. Talk to the people you care about. talking about end of life is something we don't do really well, all of us. Some people are comfortable and some people aren't, and I threw up a couple little quotations for you tonight. You know, some people are amusing about it. You know, Churchill here I thought was particularly good. I'm ready to meet my maker. Whether my maker is prepared for the great ordeal of meeting me is another matter, and I thought that was quite wonderful, right? I think Mark Twain is particularly poignant. That's the one I always say, you know, dying's easy, life is hard. Life is the hard part, right? All the stuff we have to get through to get to the end. That's the hard part, and that's what Twain says, right? All say how hard it is we have to die, which is a strange complaint from the mouths of people who've had to live, right? Living well, living through all the things we have to live through, that's our real challenge, right? Doing it in a way we can be proud of. So, yeah, it's about end of life, but it's not just about that, advanced care planning. It's a whole bunch more stuff. And I threw up some photographs here for you because some of them are about end of life, but some of them absolutely are not. And I would suggest that this is a talk you could give to a 20-year-old audience, you know, a midlife audience, an end-of-life audience. It really doesn't matter. It's for all of us. So I don't know if you can see everything I've got up there. Maybe I have too many pictures and there's too much light on them. But I would say at all the times in your life where big things happen, like you're getting married, that's a good time to think about advanced care planning. And I know it's not on every bride's to-do list. But you know, people spend 12 months planning a wedding, and they don't think about who would make decisions for them if they got in a car accident tomorrow. And yet it seems to me that's pretty basic stuff. It could happen to any of us any day of the week, right? The bride here actually, Brittany Maynard's been on the internet a whole bunch lately. I don't know lots about her story, but she's planning right now, and she's 29 years old, but she's planning because she has a brain tumor, and she wants to die well. So she's already thinking hard about that. But I wouldn't say it's every bride who has a terminal illness who's thinking about it. I'd say it's every bride. There's a picture of my son when he was still young and adorable, and I put that there because I think when you're a new parent, it's also a good time to start planning, right? We think about who would take care of our kids if something happened to us, right? We should think about who would take care of us, and what would they know what we wanted? My kids actually know because I give public lectures a whole bunch, and then I come home and I tell them this is what I talked about, and they say, there's Mom talking about end of life again. She's exciting, she's fun. But you know, when you buy a home, when you make plans, you know what the biggest time is when people talk to me about this? Is when they're getting a divorce. And given that that's 50% of us these days, it's a pretty good time to think about who would make healthcare decisions for you. So it's not just if you're thinking about end of life, but if you need a procedure, right? And you're not able to speak at the moment. You may come out of this just fine, but we may need to make some decisions along the way when you're not capable, when you're not conscious, when you're not able to speak for yourself. So one of the things that used to happen at one of my old hospitals, and I've been at this a little while, longer than I care to admit, we used to make up advanced directives with our patients. It was one of our roles. We don't do that at UHN directly. But people used to come to me because they were transitioning out of one relationship into another. And the person who would be making decisions for them might be a person with whom they have pretty strained relations, right? That's pretty motivating if your soon-to-be ex-spouse is the person who's going to make those decisions. And yet, if you don't plan well, that's exactly what might happen. So these things are important times. And you can see it's on someone's to-do list here in my pictures, file for a divorce. I guess you have to make to-do lists for everything these days. The language around advanced care planning is really confusing. And we use many terms that mean much the same thing. So I'm going to try to clarify a little bit. So advanced care planning is one piece, and that's the whole shebang, right? That's thinking about what we want to happen, who we want to decide for us, and we execute certain kinds of documents to do that, and one is called an advance directive. So that's the document. The plan is the whole piece. Some people talk about living wills, which are much the same thing. In Ontario, we talk very specifically about something called a power of attorney for personal care. So if people ask you about your POA for personal care, that's the person who makes healthcare decisions on your behalf if you're not able to do so. Power of attorney for finances is something I care very little about as a healthcare worker, because we don't get involved in that sort of thing at all. So if that's the kind of document you want to execute, you can get those documents online. That's not something I'm going to talk about tonight, because that's not something that falls within my role. And the substitute decision maker is the person under the Act, the statutory law in Ontario, who would be making decisions for you if you do nothing at all. So I'll return to these. I know it seems like a lot of stuff, and I may even mix it up, but I've brought a trainee with me tonight, and Ruby's been shadowing me and being my external memory for months, and it's a very useful thing to have. I recommend a Ruby for you too. So here's what happens if you don't name anybody at all. We have legislation in Ontario. We have something called the Ontario Healthcare Consent Act, and it's been around a while. It's 1996 it dates back to. So under the Act, if you've got a guardian, that's a very unusual thing, but if you've been found incapable by the courts and someone has been named legally for you, that's the person our hospitals will talk to. If you execute a special kind of document, I'm just going to wave it around for a minute. This is a power of attorney document. This is the one you can get by mailing or emailing or phoning, and I'll give you that information. If you execute this document, then the person you name on this document will make those decisions on your behalf. So that's why I have that in red. That's your attorney for personal care. It doesn't mean that person's a lawyer. It's just a name we give the person who makes those decisions. You could have someone named by the Consent and Capacity Board. That's less usual. And that happens when the people you name don't want to do the job you've given them, or you've named a couple of them and they can't agree, and we have to take it to a special board that'll make a decision for you. And then if you don't execute this power of attorney document, we'll just go down the hierarchy. There's actually a legal hierarchy. And that is, the first person we'll talk to is your spouse or your partner, your common law partner, right? And what's important about that is if that's not the person you want, you can execute that power of attorney document, right? And I'll give you some reasons why you might not want to have your spouse in a minute. No offense to those of you who are sitting right next to your spouse. You can pretend you don't hear this piece and you can still do what you need to do, right? So your spouse or partner, and if you don't have a spouse or partner, or that person isn't capable or doesn't want to do the job, then we turn to your adult child or parent, a brother or sister, any other relative, and even if you had no relations, no friends we could talk to about you, we can still get the Office of the Public Guardian and Trustee to make decisions on your behalf. So there is absolutely no one in this province who doesn't have someone to speak for them. And that's a good thing. So, as I told you before, there's a lot of language that sounds the same. There's a tomato-tomato thing going on, right? Sometimes we say substitute decision maker is the person deciding for you. Sometimes we say surrogate decision maker, and that doesn't mean someone who carries your baby, right? Not in this context. Some people talk about medical proxies. Some people talk about power of attorney. And power of attorney is the person you name through executing this document. And that person makes medical decisions for you, right? Consent for treatment. That's what we're looking for, right? And that only comes into effect if you're not able to consent on your own behalf. So that person isn't deciding for you, well, you're still able to talk to us and tell us what you want. And we don't want to override your wishes. We really very much want to talk to you first and foremost. But we're not doing very well on this front. So I have a few statistics for you, for those of you who loves little factoids. I can never remember them, so I can write them down or ask Ruby. But 86% of Canadians haven't heard of advanced care planning. So you're way ahead of the game, right? So you're doing better than the rest of us. Less than 50% have had a discussion with a family member or a friend about their treatments if they weren't able to communicate, right? So if you're not talking to the people who are close to you, the people we might talk to if you couldn't speak, they won't know what you want, right? But it's rare that people do. And only 9% have talked to their physicians, other healthcare people about what they want. And that can be really important if you have a serious illness, right? Because you may want to know what's possible for me. What can I hope for in terms of goals of care? What kinds of outcomes can I expect? But only 9% have talked to their physicians about that. That's not very high, right? 80% don't have a written plan, and yet it's very, very easy to do. And only 46% have designated someone to speak on their behalf. So we're not doing so great. Oops. So this is my dear husband, and I told him I would use his picture shamelessly tonight because I'm carrying with me tonight his power of attorney, which I gave him 2 years ago. I just want to show you, so just between us. This is the page he's supposed to fill out to name his power of attorney, and he hasn't done it yet. So it's been 2 years. I'm not that persuasive with him. I hope I'm more persuasive with some of you. And the reason he won't do it is because he said he's not going to die. And I said, well, hon, I didn't mean you were going to die today or tomorrow or maybe not even next week or month, but someday. And he said, no, you don't understand. I'm not going to die, ever. So he's not terribly realistic on this front. And I mention this because I want you to feel welcome to choose whomever you think is the right person to speak on your behalf. When I was a beginning ethicist in my very first job, remember I told you I used to help staff and patients with these conversations, and one of the things we did, and this was another province, so the law is a little bit different, but we used to type up power of attorney documents. And I had a patient who was about to be discharged post heart surgery. It's going to shut down in 10 minutes. Remember what I said about memory? That would be dire. That would be very dire. But it's okay now, I think. Yeah. And he can edit that out. So it's all good. So as a young ethicist, this patient's wife called me. Patient just had his heart attack. He was doing okay. He was feeling like he wanted to take charge of his life. See how I worked in your name of your lecture series? He's going to take charge. And she said, okay, I need you to do this soon because we don't want to have to hire a lawyer, and we heard you could do this efficiently. And I said, sure thing, ma'am. And I said, give me the particulars, give me the right name. I spelled it carefully, got the postal code, did all the right things, ran to the room, and brought the document with me, and the patient said, I don't want it to be you, dear. I love you very much, but I know how hard this was for you, and I think it should be your brother Joe. I want my brother-in-law to be my power of attorney. And I thought, okay, they need to have a little conversation now about how that goes. But it was a really powerful lesson, right? We shouldn't assume anything. And it's certainly not about naming the person you love the most, right? So my dear husband, who's never going to die, may not be the right person to have hard conversations about end of life, right? This isn't really my advance directive, and yes, honey, you are on my power of attorney document, but it really should be the person you feel comfortable talking to. It should be a person who will respect and follow your wishes. And that's not hard. That can be hard for the person closest for you, who would be comfortable speaking up, because healthcare environments, as you probably know, are not the most comfortable places or the easiest places to have those kinds of conversations and to advocate for what you know your loved one wants, right? So who is physically and emotionally capable of doing that? So think about who that person might be, not the person you love, the most of all in the whole wide world. It's not about that. So, even if your spouse would rather be fishing, which is where mine is all the time, right? It's a good thing to do. Your power of attorney right, without a POA, will be the highest person in that healthcare consent hierarchy, the highest person on the hierarchy who is over 16 years of age, capable of making healthcare decisions. And by the way, that person has to be willing and available. And as a hospital ethicist, I can tell you that many, many people name someone who hasn't been told they've been named. And they say, John? I haven't seen him in 15 years. I have no idea what he wants. Or, Phyllis, that son of a gun? Really? I can't stand her, right? So, apologies to anybody with those names, I just popped into my head. So you have to talk to people who are willing, name people who are willing and available. Again, just a reminder of the hierarchy in the Act. If you do nothing, these are the people we will talk to. Your spouse or your partner, child or parent with right of access if there's child care custody issues, brother or sister, or any other relative, right? So it's very, very clear. Our hands are tied. Now you can see that on this hierarchy, you might have people at the same level in the hierarchy, right? So what if you have multiple brothers or sisters, or multiple children? That can be tricky, and I'll give you a case like that in a sec. Here's another reason if I didn't give you enough. There was a very good study that was published in the Journal of Internal Medicine that I thought was quite powerful, and it looked at things like post-traumatic stress in family members who had loved ones in the ICU. And it was very, very interesting. One of the things they found out, and they call them surrogates, so it's another jurisdiction, but what we're talking about is substitute decision makers. People had significant emotional conflict when they had to take decisions for others. They were trying to honor the wishes of the people they loved, but they also didn't want to feel responsible for withdrawal of life-sustaining treatment, even when they knew that's what the patient would want. It tore them apart. And I have to tell you, I, as an ethicist, have a strong personal motivation for wanting people to make decisions ahead of time, because that's when I get called, right? Me and my colleagues, we get called when people are very distressed about these questions, and part of our job is to help you walk through the process. And there are things that can help. So, one, people don't want to make those decisions, right? They want to pursue any chance of recovery, no matter how hopeless it is. And they want to preserve a family, because even when their loved one dies, they have to get along with one another. And we often appeal to that, right? When we've got warring siblings, we're saying, would your mom want you to be fighting like this, right? Can we work through this in a way that's productive, in a way that she'd want you to work through this question, right? And coping strategies that really, truly work are things like remembering a conversation they had with you, right? So if they can remember that power of attorney conversation, that helps them to cope. That reduces the incidence of post-traumatic stress for these folks, right? Or sharing the decision together with their siblings when that can happen. And we know it can't always happen. Unhappy families don't get happier at those kinds of times, right? It gets worse, and you know that. Deferring decision-making, even when they know it's not the right thing to do, so they put off unpleasant conversations. They don't make decisions, and then things are forced into a crisis. But there are better coping strategies, right? Some are good, some are bad. One is, for a lot of people, it's their spiritual practices, their religious practices, connecting with the spiritual care team in the hospital, or social work, or bioethics. And part of our job is to say, tell me more about your family member. Tell me what they valued. Tell me a story about a time when your family member was proud of you. Sometimes that can tease out the things they really care about, right? So the storytelling piece can be really useful, but you can contribute to that in advance so they have some stories to draw on that are ready to hand. Or maybe the stories are about something they were told about a good life. What did a good life look like? What did a good death look like? What did your family member care about? How did he want it to go? So these can be really good. The power of attorney, yes, sir. Can I turn up the volume? I don't know how. We don't have any control, but I can use my, outside voice. How's that? I will do that. Thank you for telling me. Yeah. So your direction is really important for your family members. And I have done mine. It took me a couple years, by the way, to work out how I was going to do this and what I was going to say, because I have 3 kids, right? I get it. It's not easy. It should be an expression of your values, right? And I want to tell you one more thing. A power of attorney document is a lousy vehicle for mending fences, right? Or remedying perceptions of favoritism and saying, oh, I don't want to name my daughter Una because my son Noel will be jealous, right? They really are my kids. Sorry, kids. It's not about that, right? That's not what this document is for. Trust me, I'm a mom. I live on guilt, okay? I get it. But I also have this job for a living, and I know that that's what it shouldn't be doing. If you can't hear me, keep like that. Okay. Here's a real case that was reported. This is in the public domain. This is a consent and capacity board hearing, so these things are published. And this is what happens when the healthcare team's not really sure about what to do. So here's Jeanette. She's a 75-year-old lady with a stage 3 cancer and a dementia. She has 4 kids, but one of them, Anita, has the power of attorney. So at least we know we should be talking to Anita. Anita has had a falling out with a family doctor, which isn't a great thing because often we rely on family doctors to know you over a longer period of time than the ones who see you in an acute setting. But it's because Anita has a problem with narcotics. She's got a serious addiction issue. Now, personal support workers have been coming into their apartment and have noticed it's a 1-bedroom apartment. There's daughter, mom, and 5 puppies, right? So that's a little tight quarters. Daughter and mother use wheelchairs, so it's even tighter. Living space, according to the team, seems pretty tight and chaotic. Daughter doesn't like to bring mom to her medical appointments because she's afraid that mom will be put in long-term care for her own good. So she knows that people perceive their living arrangements to be suboptimal. And they have outings to the mall quite often. Sorry, folks, I have to... I've lost it. Why have I lost it, guys? Should I keep telling you a story while this is happening?
I'm being waved off. That was my 3 minutes.
Aha.
Thanks for your patience.
So can I just start where I was, or do you remember this story at all? So we have these horrible living quarters, yeah, and 5 puppies. Okay, so we're good. So they have outings to the mall. They do get out. They do things, right? They have a little community. And the patient says, I want to stay with my daughter. They have their disagreements, but if they get to be too much, she's going to go back and live with her mother in the Maritimes. True story. Now, her mother's been deceased for a while, so there is a barrier to that plan, but she doesn't remember it. And so there's an admission to acute care, and the hospital staff decide to escalate this to the Consent and Capacity Board, because even though there is a duly executed power of attorney, they're thinking maybe daughter is not capable of understanding and appreciating what's best for her mom, or maybe daughter is not acting in her best interest, but in any case, nobody's very happy with the situation. How do you suppose it went? You think she stayed with her daughter? How many people think she stayed with her daughter? A few. How many think that somebody else was named power of attorney? She does have other kids. She has 4. Yeah, so it's pretty divided. So you can see how a healthcare team could get divided, yeah? People don't like to see patients living in these kinds of circumstances. They're worried, you know, is she getting her medication? Is she getting the right kind of care? And the thinking of the consent, the answer is she did stay with her daughter, by the way. And this is a lesson to, you know, maybe, I don't know why she chose this daughter. Maybe she thought she was the most capable of understanding her values, but maybe this is the daughter she was closest to or felt had lots of her own issues, and she was showing solidarity and love by naming her power of attorney. We don't know, and we'll never know. But it's a powerful thing to execute such a document, right? So the lesson is, choose the person you think would make the right decisions on your behalf, the ones that would honor your values. And maybe Mrs. LeBlanc did that. We don't know. But the Consent and Capacity Board was persuaded she did. Now, if it had been on the hierarchy, if she had never executed a document, it would have been easier to overlook this daughter, right? It might have been easier to say, well, there might be somebody else, right? Because they would all have equal standing, and then we would have potentially disagreement between children. And we may have had to have the board rule on who should decide for her, and they may not have chosen this daughter. But you can see what a powerful thing you do when you execute such a document. It's hard to start the conversation, so there are some tools out there for you. The Speak Up Guide is amazing. It's put out by the Canadian Hospice and Palliative Care Association, and Rob tells me that when tonight is over, he's going to put some of those links up for you, so you've got information, and he's nodding, so he hasn't forgotten, and he wasn't lying, as you know, you're all our witnesses. There are other resources too. One is really a neat idea that I've seen out there. It's called an ethical will. Has anybody heard about that? They're neat, aren't they? There are some traditions. There's a very old Christian and a very old Judaic tradition, and other cultures may have them as well, of leaving a thing called an ethical will, which really says things about how you feel about your kids, how you feel about the people you care for. It allows you to express forgiveness for people who've harmed you, allows you to say anything you want. That's where that kind of conversation can take place. Don't let your power of attorney document get mixed up with this other kind of motivation. These are beautiful documents, and they're great to execute, and you can find resources online to do that by looking up values histories and ethical wills, and you can do all kinds of good work through stories, conversations, memory books. But power of attorney is designed to do one thing, right? It's designed to tell us who to speak to when you can't speak for yourself. And as they speak up, we'll give you some good conversation starters, like pass the gravy and have you done a living will, right? Stuff like that. It's actually better than that. Here's a case that's kind of a composite based on one I was called in on. I've changed a lot of things, and it's a long, long time ago. But here's another way these things can happen. Here's Ingrid. She's a 96-year-old widow, So we don't have a spouse. Remember, spouse would be top in the hierarchy. Of Northern European background. All of her family was back in the old country except daughter. But she has this one daughter, Lisa, who is in private practice as a lawyer. She has one grandson she absolutely adores, and he's a physician. And she's now in our cardiac care unit. And her daughter's saying, I want surgery for her. I want her to have an implantable defibrillator. Grandson said, I talked to Grandma about this, and she didn't want that, right? So I think we need an ethics consultation, and this is truly the conversation we had when I was paged at 3 in the morning and came and sat with them all night in that cardiac care unit. And the trouble with speaking with Ingrid was her memory wasn't good, so we had to catch her at moments when she was lucid and still able to have those kinds of conversations, and those moments were increasingly rare, so that was hard. Lisa, the daughter, has been caring for her mom until now, but Lisa has a drinking problem, right? And grandson is very, very worried. And remember, Lisa is his own mother, right? So this is extra hard. He's worried that her judgment is impaired now. How do you suppose we're going to sort that one out? Who's got the, so we have no POA, we have no document. Who gets to decide for Ingrid if she can't communicate to us well? Would it be her daughter or her grandson who's a doctor? How many say daughter? How many want to say the grandson? Why do you say the grandson?
Because there's a generation gap, and maybe he's looking at it in a more realistic way.
So some of you think maybe the generation gap. There are some other characteristics of grandson who might make him a good decision maker. And he's a physician. He might get stuff, right? You know what we say sometimes, we healthcare people? He's so reasonable. We can talk to him, right? And it's easy to talk to one of our own, but we don't get to do that, right? Without a power of attorney that names him, we need to deal with her daughter, Lisa, whether we like it or not, whether she has a drinking problem or not. She's still a practicing lawyer, right? So I assume she has some capacity, some sphere of capacity, right? The very best situation is if we can get those moments when Ingrid's able to talk. But what we did do that evening is we tried to capitalize on their affection for one another and their affection for her, and tried to think about what kinds of things she said and said to grandson, said to Lisa, that would give us a glimmer of insight into her values and get them on the same page. So we didn't think we would override Lisa. It was important that we worked with her. But see how easy it could have been, right? If she had communicated well to her kids, even if she didn't name grandson, who was a physician, and you don't have to be a physician. You don't have to, right? It would have been so much easier if we'd just known what she wanted. So we know she might not be capable. Number one's we're going to find out if she is. That isn't her, by the way. It's just a photograph. We know she's the legally designated decision maker. We know we've got disagreement, and we know we need a decision. Right? We don't get not to make a decision. And these aren't the times to make decisions when people have very serious, distressing circumstances. A CCU, an ICU, that's a hard time to sit down and think calmly about all of these things. The other thing to know is you don't have to name just one person. You can name more than one, right? And there are pros and cons to that. So you can take your time and think about that. You may want more than one person, so they have to talk to each other about it, right? You have to know who you're dealing with, though, because if they can never, ever come to agreement, it will go to a consent and capacity board, or the public guardian and trustee, I should say, because they need to break those ties. So it'll be taken away altogether from the people who know you best. The other thing to know is we still care about suffering, right? So even if you say in your document or in your conversation with your family members that you don't want lots of high-tech interventions, we still have lots of decision points. We still have lots of things we can do about care for you and about treatment. You may even, if you're palliative, have surgery for a broken hip, for example, if that's what's needed to alleviate suffering. It really does depend on the particulars of the patient's case. Sometimes we still give antibiotics. It really depends on the situation. We will always give pain relief. It's nothing more distressing than to healthcare providers than family members who don't want to treat pain, right? And medication to ease breathing difficulties, all of that can be done. So saying that you don't want lots of interventions doesn't mean abandonment, and people need to hear that. Here's some more of those resources. There's a senior secretariat that has a guide to advanced care planning. It's fantastic, it's simple, it's clear, it's written for a lay audience, and you can pull that off the internet. And these things are all, as I say, free of charge. I think that's one of those resources that Rob is nodding, saying he will supply for you. Who can be your POA? Well, someone you can trust, someone who's willing. Remember I said someone who's available. So if someone's on vacation a whole bunch, might not be the right person. But then again, nobody has a house phone anymore, I guess. So I guess you can reach most people easily. The people who can't be your power of attorney are also important to think about. So someone who's not old enough, not reached the age of 16 in this jurisdiction. Your landlord can't be your POA, and I've seen lots that are done that way. People don't always realize that. And certainly some of us have very small communities. The people we love have passed away or moved. And landlords seem like reasonable people if we have good relations. Or people paid to provide care for you, they can't be your power of attorney. We want to avoid any potential financial conflict of interest. You can't be your social worker. It says so in the document. It can't be your counselor or teacher, your doctor, your nurse, or other healthcare provider, even if they're the best in the world. Right? They can't be that. That's what the document looks like. It comes in a booklet, or as I say, oh, my mom hasn't filled hers out either. Hi, Mom. But it looks like this, and that's the pages I'm showing you. And in the document, each section tells you how to fill it out. So you don't have to remember what I say. It will take you through the step by step, and in one piece it will say, these people cannot be your power of attorney. So I'm just flashing it up there so it's available to you. There are different kinds. You could name joint attorneys. I don't want any of my kids to feel left out. Sorry, I had to put them all in. You can name them jointly, so they have to act together. You can have people who act separately. Or you can name someone who can substitute for someone else if that first person isn't available. And the document tells you all of that too. So you might name your best friend Fred, but if Fred isn't available, John can make the decision for me. So that's a substitute attorney. So there are some challenges with each of them. Joint attorneys have to decide together, as I said before. And I've seen lots of warring siblings trying to show us all how much, who loves mom the most by fighting over who gets to decide. So if you want to name multiple people, make sure they can work together and they understand how very important it is that they work together at least for this purpose, right? You can name jointly and severally on the document, and it tells you that as you work through the document, right? So you can allow them to act separately. So if one is on vacation, the other one can act in that person's absence. But you may want them to act together because you want them to be checks and balances on one another, right? It really does depend on your people. This is the document. Again, it tells you exactly that. The substitute I talked about already, right? So one of them may, at the time of decision, find out that this is just too much. And that does happen, right? They just feel it's just too taxing for them, or they don't want to be the person who decides. And remember, I talked about that slide earlier in the ICU. It's sometimes really, really tough for people, and they don't want to be responsible. So if you've named a substitute attorney, then we know exactly who to go to when Fred won't act, right? Or can't act, or just doesn't have the ability to make a decision. So you've already told us, if Fred can't, then Ruby will, right? So what do they decide? Some people fear that their attorney will take away all decisions for them. And that's not how it goes. There can be areas in which you're capable to still decide, and we will honor those areas, and we will try to support you as best we can to make decisions as best we can, right? And in those areas where you're not capable, we'll turn to your decision maker. For example, you may be capable of making healthcare decisions. You may understand what the treatment options are that are available to you, and you may know precisely what you want, but you may not have much insight into how much risk you would be at if you continued to live at home. So one of the things your attorney might have to decide for you is where you get to live. And I have to say that is one of the things that startles folks most of all, right? If you need a long-term care placement, then we will also turn to your power of attorney for that. So a power of attorney for personal care can make decisions about health care, but also about any services you could receive in your home, getting CCAC in to give you extra care, or about when it's time to go to a long-term care residence. So you really have to trust somebody to make the kinds of decisions you would want. But if you can still make those decisions, then we absolutely will talk to you about that. So we've had patients, for example, who have decided that insulin is a poison. They will never take their insulin. But in every other aspect, they have insight and ability to manage their own care. But about that one thing, they are just not making any sense. That might be a time when we turn to the POA for that. But everything else, the patient would still decide. Does that make sense? Things are separable, right? My example is always that I stopped driving about, well, it's now 20 years ago. I wanted to say 10, but it's really been longer than that, because I know I do not have the attention to be operating an automotive vehicle. That is one area of great incapacity that I have, that I'm not ashamed to state, because it's better for all of you if I don't do that, right? But it doesn't mean I'm incapable in all aspects of my life. There's a very narrow range in which I function well, right? And people let me do that. They let me come up here and you record me and you listen to me and I don't understand it, but you do, right? But when it comes to driving an automobile, I don't have a license. It's a very good thing. It's an area of incapacity. We're not all one thing or another. Many people can't balance their own checkbooks anymore, but they're very, very good at household management and healthcare insights, right? The other thing is you can limit the power you give your attorney. So there is a Section 5 of this form that says, I don't want my guardian to make decisions about, and you can list those things, right? So they might be about where you live, right? They might be about who you associate with. They might be about the clothing you wear. Because I'll tell you, family members can get really twisted up about how you dress, what you eat, who comes to visit you, right? So some powers of attorney, some people given that authority want to decide everything, right? And so we have to say to them, no, this is your job, right? And restrict some of those decisions. Signatures. I'm almost at the end, folks, and we'll have some time to talk. You sign the document on Part 6. You'll see what that is when you get one. 2 witnesses have to be there at the same time. So you can't have one person witness your signature at one moment and then give it off to someone else to witness at the same. You've got to pull 2 people together. And by the way, we're not too fussed up about who those people are. They could be people who are in another patient room across the hall, right? But they can't be, and again, healthcare workers. We don't allow at UHM, we don't allow our staff to witness these documents just because we don't want people to feel like they could get into a conflict of interest. It can't be the person you're naming or their spouse or their partner. It can't be your spouse or partner or child or a person who's under guardianship of the courts, and it can't be a person under 18. But that's pretty much everybody else, right? If you change your mind, you can change your POA, and you can do it at no cost. So you can pull off the same documents, print them out of your printer, or order, I'd say order a bunch of booklets. You'll get Rob to order them and bring them to this session someday. You can pull them off, you can make one out, and then the next week you can say, wow, Frank was really kind of lousy at listening. I really think Judith would be better. And you can sign and date another one. All you have to do is write it down, sign and date it. It says that this document supersedes any document you did before. So you are not stuck with this. This is not a stone tablet, right? And tell the person who's now going to decide for you that you'd like him to decide for you, so they don't get those crazy surprise phone calls where I say, George, you got a job to do. And he says, I don't know Fred, haven't known Fred for 20 years, right? So have your say. Think about what you want. This is stolen right from that Speak Up campaign, right? These are their language. So think about what you want. Learn a little bit about this. Decide who you want it to be. Start having a conversation. Document your wishes. Think about, and these are little conversation starters, right? What makes my life meaningful, right? What do I care about most of all? What do I worry about most of all at the end? What would be a bad death? What would be a good death for me, right? What do I want? Do I want someone to hold my hand, right? Are there special rituals I would like, poems I would like said to me, music I'd like to have played, right? If I can't communicate, what kinds of things would I like to say? That's when those wonderful ethical wills can be useful, right? Where you can say, I love you, or I forgive you. There are ways to do those kinds of things. So you can start thinking about those a little bit. I know I said it wasn't going to be depressing, but here's the thing. You got to talk turkey, right? And it's just past Thanksgiving. If you sign up with these Speak Up folks, and the link is there, they'll send you these little email reminders, and one of them is at Thanksgiving. It's Thanksgiving. Have you talked to your family about this over the turkey? Right? Well, I actually didn't, because it was one of those family things, and they have their own motivations and topics, and they really probably didn't want to talk about advanced care planning, although I did ostentatiously leave the brochures out on the sideboard, and everyone ignored them. But here's some links. Rob will give them to you. I say, you can do it early, do it often, just do it, and do it for the people you care about, do it for yourself. Thank you.
So, does anybody have any questions? Very good.
Nothing.
Let me come over here and say thank you very much, Anne.
Okay.
There you are. I got to
Nice
sit here.
lady.
Thank you very much. Wonderful presentation.
Thank you very much,
We
Rob.
appreciate it. Okay, thank you for coming. And I mean, we've got all the links. As Anna said, I will endeavor to put these up where the presentation is, so you guys can go here and take a look at it. It's important stuff. You know where it is now. At the very least, make a commitment before the end of the year to go and take a look at the stuff. Thumb through the brochures. It's important, it's meaningful, it's in your own best interests, and keep that in mind. All right, thank you very much, everyone.
Thanks, folks.